After the divorce, I thought my life had finally begun. No more arguments, no more constant pressure, no more feeling like I had to prove myself every single day. I moved into a small apartment, started a new job, and for the first time in years, I felt free. Life was simple, peaceful, and mine. But peace, I learned, can be fragile. It was a Tuesday afternoon when my phone rang. I glanced at the screen and my heart almost stopped. The caller ID read, "My ex-mother-in-law." I hadn't spoken to her in months, not since the bitter end of my marriage, and I certainly hadn't wanted to. "Hello?" I answered, my voice cautious. Her tone was sharp, urgent, and completely devoid of warmth. "Your husband, he's in the hospital. Bring the money." My mind went blank. My stomach twisted. Part of me wanted to hang up immediately, to say, this is not my problem anymore. But another part, a small, irrational part, worried. Was he really in danger? Could it be serious? Despite the anger rising in my chest, I found myself asking, how much? She rattled off a number that made my head spin. My hands trembled as I transferred the money, feeling the old, familiar mix of fear, guilt, and anger wash over me. How had I come to this? How had I become the person everyone expected to rescue, to pay, to fix everything, even after I had left? Hanging up the phone, I sank into my chair, overwhelmed by a swirl of emotions. I remembered all the years I had given, care, love, loyalty, to a man who barely acknowledged me, and to a family that seemed to only see me as an obligation, not a person. And now, here I was, again, the one they called when money was needed, and nothing else. But something had shifted inside me. This time, I wasn't running blindly. I decided I would go to the hospital, but I wouldn't let them manipulate me anymore. I needed to see the truth for myself, to understand what really happened and why they chose to involve me only now. Driving to the hospital, my mind raced with memories, anger, and an uneasy curiosity. What would I see when I got there? Would I find him weak and sick, or would I discover another layer of lies and manipulation? One thing was certain, this encounter would change something inside me, something that had been dormant for too long, my voice, my boundaries, my strength. I took a deep breath as the hospital came into view, bracing myself for whatever awaited. This wasn't just about money, it was about facing the reality of a past I thought I had left behind. If you've ever been manipulated after leaving a toxic relationship, stay with me. Like, share, and subscribe to my channel because my story is far from over and you won't want to miss what happens next. I parked outside the hospital, my heart pounding as if it had anticipated every possible disaster. The sterile smell hit me the moment I stepped inside, along with the low murmur of hurried nurses and distant beeping machines. My hands were clammy, my mind a storm of conflicting emotions, anger, fear, and the strange, lingering thread of concern that I couldn't quite ignore. I asked the reception desk for my ex-husband's room. The receptionist gave me a puzzled look but pointed me down a long corridor. As I walked, every step seemed heavier than the last. Memories of the past clung to me, moments of joy, arguments, tears, and disappointments. I had thought I had left it all behind, yet here, in this cold, brightly lit hallway, the past reached out to grab me again. When I finally entered his room, my breath caught. There he was, lying on the hospital bed, pale, fragile, hooked to monitors. Seeing him like this, so vulnerable, sent a jolt through me I hadn't expected. Despite everything, despite the pain he had caused, a small part of me still felt a pang of concern. And then my ex-mother-in-law appeared, her eyes narrowing the moment she saw me. Her face was sharp, impatient. "You didn't even ask how he is. Money is the priority, remember?" she snapped, Her words cut through the uneasy silence like a knife. I realized then that my presence wasn't about care, concern, or forgiveness. To her, I was simply a source of money, a lifeline whenever it suited her needs. All those months of anger, all the distance I had created to protect myself, it didn't matter. I was back in their control, even without trying. I stayed quietly, observing the doctors as they worked efficiently, the beeping machines, the small nervous gestures of the nurses. I didn't know whether to feel relief or frustration. Relief that he was being treated, frustration that I was forced into this position yet again. As I watched, I noticed how he avoided meeting my gaze. Perhaps he knew, deep down, that this hospital visit wasn't about love or concern, it was about obligation and survival. My heart ached with the bitter truth. Everything between us had been transactional, and nothing had changed. Still, I remained there, silently telling myself that I wouldn't let emotions dictate my actions this time. I was no longer the person who would be controlled by guilt or fear. I could care without being manipulated. I could help without sacrificing myself. By the time I left the room, my mind was made up. I would support him if it was necessary, but I would no longer allow anyone, not him, not his mother, to take advantage of my compassion. My life had boundaries now, and I was determined to enforce them, no matter how uncomfortable it might make others. If you've ever felt used or manipulated by people you once trusted, stay tuned for the next part of my story. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to my channel for the full journey. It's far from over. After leaving the hospital that day, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I had seen him lying there, so fragile, but the whole situation didn't sit right with me. The panic in my ex-mother-in-law's voice, the urgency of the call, and the way she had demanded money, it all seemed too calculated. I couldn't ignore it anymore. The next morning, curiosity and unease pushed me to dig deeper. I called the hospital, pretending to be a concerned friend, and asked about his condition. The receptionist hesitated at first, then carefully explained that his illness had been ongoing for months, but it was manageable with proper care. He hadn't been admitted in an emergency. He had only gone in after his mother pressured him to do so because the bills were piling up. A chill ran down my spine. The panic call I had received wasn't about his health, it was about money. My ex-mill had waited until the situation became financially inconvenient for them before reaching out to me. I realized the harsh truth. Their concern had nothing to do with my ex-husband's well-being. It was about control, greed, and using me as a safety net. I sat in my apartment, trembling with a mix of anger and disbelief. I had spent years giving, forgiving, and trying to salvage a relationship that was never truly mutual. And now, even after I had walked away, I was expected to jump at the first sign of trouble and provide financial help without question? For a moment, I felt the familiar pang of guilt, the one I had carried for years. But this time, I refused to let it control me. I was done being manipulated. I had the right to care on my own terms, to set boundaries, and to protect myself from their selfish demands. The realization hit me harder than I expected. Everything I had endured during my marriage, the emotional exhaustion, the unreciprocated efforts, the constant sense of walking on eggshells, had prepared me for this moment. I now had clarity, strength, and the ability to stand firm. I wasn't the same person who had blindly given, forgiven, and hoped. I was someone who could act with purpose, someone who had learned the truth and would no longer be a pawn. And yet, as I sat there, I couldn't help but wonder, what would happen when they realized I wouldn't respond to their manipulation anymore? Would they finally respect my boundaries, or would they try even harder to pull me back into their chaos? One thing was certain, I had a choice now. I could either let them continue to control me with fear and obligation, or I could take back my power and live my life free from their manipulation. And for the first time in a long time, I knew exactly what I was going to do. If you've ever uncovered the truth about people who only reach out when they need something, stay with me. Like, share, and subscribe to my channel because the next part of my story is where everything changes. I couldn't ignore it any longer. I had uncovered the truth, and the anger inside me had been quietly building for weeks. My ex-husband and his mother had used me for years, but now I was done letting them take advantage of my compassion. I needed to confront them, face the reality head on, and finally speak my truth. I returned to the hospital, this time with my mind set on clarity, not fear. As soon as I walked into the room, my ex-mother-in-law's eyes narrowed. "You're here again? Didn't you give enough yesterday?" she snapped, her voice dripping with irritation rather than concern. I didn't flinch. I looked her directly in the eyes and said firmly, "No, I'm here because I want to understand why you only called me when money was involved. Why did it take a hospital bill for you to reach out?" For a moment, she faltered, as if my words had caught her off guard. She stumbled over her excuses, claiming concern for his health, pretending that the money was secondary. I saw right through her lies. She was counting on me to feel guilty, to fall back into the same patterns I had for years, but this time I wasn't going to. Then I turned to him. My ex-husband avoided my gaze, shifting uncomfortably in the bed. "Do you even care?" I asked softly, the years of betrayal and disappointment pressing into every word. "Or is this just about keeping your mother happy?" He stayed silent. I could see the shame in his eyes, the realization that I had finally seen him for what he truly was, not a partner, but someone who had always relied on me as a fallback. The tension in the room was thick. My voice grew stronger, steadier. "I've helped, I've given, and I've forgiven more than you'll ever know, but I'm done being used. I will no longer allow you to manipulate me, guilt me, or make me feel obligated." For the first time, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. The years of anger, resentment, and frustration didn't disappear, but I was finally claiming my power. I didn't need their approval. I didn't need them to see me as anything other than myself, strong, independent, and unafraid to stand up for my own boundaries. My ex-mother-in-law looked furious, but I didn't care. My ex-husband looked guilty, but I didn't need his apology. What mattered was that I had spoken my truth, and I had reclaimed control over my life. As I left the hospital that day, I felt a sense of freedom I hadn't known in years. This confrontation wasn't just about money or lies. It was about reclaiming myself from the people who had tried to diminish me. If you've ever had the courage to confront someone who tried to manipulate you, like, share, and subscribe to my channel. The next of my story reveals the powerful decision I made for myself, and you won't want to miss it. After the confrontation at the hospital, I felt a strange mix of exhaustion and relief. The anger that had been simmering inside me for months finally had a release, and for the first time in years, I felt a small spark of clarity. I realized that this situation, this endless cycle of guilt, manipulation, and obligation, wasn't going to change unless I made a conscious decision to change it myself. That evening, I sat alone in my apartment, reflecting on everything that had happened. The hospital visit, the call from my ex-mother-in-law, the lies I had uncovered. It all weighed heavily on me. But as I thought about it, a clear resolution began to take shape. I would help if it was necessary, but it would be on my terms. No more automatic transfers of money, no more sleepless nights worrying about obligations I never signed up for. No more pretending that their needs outweighed my own well-being. I had spent too long being the fixer, the person everyone assumed would drop everything for them. That ends now. I drafted a plan. I would assist with essentials, yes, but only after verifying the situation. I would no longer act out of fear or guilt. I would not allow them to use illness or crisis as a weapon to pull me back into a life I had fought so hard to leave. The next day, I made a decision that would surprise them. When my ex-mother-in-law called again, demanding immediate payment for what she called urgent medical bills, I calmly explained that I would review the situation first. I reminded her that I had responsibilities of my own, and I would not respond to demands out of fear or obligation. Her voice cracked with frustration, but I stayed firm. For the first time, I felt empowered rather than controlled. I also reached out to a few close friends and colleagues to ensure that I had a support system in place. It wasn't about cutting ties completely, it was about protecting my energy and making sure I had allies who understood my boundaries. Later that week, I visited him one last time at the hospital. I saw the worry in his eyes, the realization that I wasn't just going to comply automatically anymore. I helped him where I could, providing support and advice, but I refused to let my emotions be manipulated. It was a delicate balance, but one I was learning to master. That day, I understood something crucial. Freedom isn't just about leaving a toxic relationship. It's about reclaiming your power, setting boundaries, and refusing to allow anyone to guilt you into being someone you're not. Helping others is noble, but helping at the cost of your own peace is not. For the first time, I felt what it truly meant to prioritize myself without guilt, and I knew that this decision, this stand I had taken, would shape the rest of my life. If you've ever had to take a stand and protect your peace, like, share, and subscribe to my channel. The next of my story shows how they finally realized my worth and how everything started to change. Weeks passed since I had made my decision to set boundaries. At first, it wasn't easy. My ex-mother-in-law called constantly, trying to guilt me, reminding me of past favors and hinting at emergencies that demanded my immediate attention. My ex-husband sent messages filled with regret, trying to evoke sympathy, as if my compassion could be switched on and off at their convenience. But I stayed firm. I didn't respond to every call. I didn't rush to their aid at the first hint of trouble. I realized that true power isn't loud or aggressive. It's calm, consistent, and unwavering. And slowly, very slowly, they began to notice. It started with subtle changes. My ex-mother-in-law's tone softened when she spoke to me, though she still tried to mask it with annoyance. My ex-husband stopped sending frantic messages and began taking responsibility for his own decisions. It was as if they finally understood that I was no longer someone to be pushed around, someone whose feelings and resources could be taken for granted. One afternoon, I received a call, not from them, but from the hospital. My ex-husband's condition required minor follow-up care. I listened carefully, confirmed the details, and agreed to assist where I could. But I made it clear this was not out of fear, guilt, or obligation. It was because I chose to help on my terms. When I finally visited him, something had changed. There was a new sense of respect in their eyes, a realization that I was no longer a passive participant in their drama. I helped with what was needed, but I did so without sacrificing my dignity or peace. And that, I realized, was the real lesson. They were learning that boundaries weren't punishments. They were the mark of someone who valued themselves. For me, it was empowering. Every time I said no, every time I held firm, I reclaimed a piece of my life that had long been controlled by others. I had spent years giving, compromising, and forgiving. Now, I was learning to receive respect and recognition in return. And the best part? I didn't have to demand it. I simply had to be firm, consistent, and true to myself. By the end of the week, I felt a shift, not just in their behavior, but within myself. I had learned the invaluable lesson that setting boundaries is not selfish, it is essential. I had discovered my worth, and nothing they did could take that away. I walked away from that hospital visit with a quiet pride. For the first time, I wasn't just surviving, I was thriving. I was free from manipulation, free from guilt, and free to live life on my own terms. Months had passed since I had finally set my boundaries and reclaimed control over my life. At first, it had been difficult. Old habits die hard, and the temptation to respond to every crisis, to fix every problem, was strong. But over time, I discovered a profound sense of freedom that I hadn't felt in years. Life after the chaos of manipulation wasn't just quiet, it was empowering. I started focusing on myself, my career, and my passions, things that had been pushed aside while I navigated the constant demands of others. I began to enjoy small moments of solitude, savoring the peace I had worked so hard to earn. Every morning, waking up in my own space, without fear, without guilt, felt like a victory. I also rebuilt relationships with friends who truly cared about me. These were people who supported me, who listened without judgment, and who reminded me that my feelings and needs mattered just as much as anyone else's. It was refreshing to experience connection without obligation, without manipulation, without the constant undercurrent of stress. And then there was the internal transformation. I noticed how differently I viewed my past. The anger and resentment I had carried for so long began to fade, not because I forgave them entirely, but because I no longer allowed their actions to control my emotions. I had grown stronger, wiser, and more resilient. My worth was no longer defined by how much I gave or how much I sacrificed for others. It was inherent, unshakable, and mine alone. Even encounters with my ex-husband and his mother no longer triggered panic or guilt. I had learned to navigate those moments with calm and confidence. If they needed help, they would have to respect my rules. If they tried to manipulate me, they would find me unshakable. It was a strange, liberating power to be able to care without being used, to give without being controlled. Life after chaos wasn't about revenge or bitterness, it was about reclaiming my narrative. I realized that I didn't owe anyone my constant attention or endless patience. I didn't owe them my money, my time, or my emotional energy. I was free to prioritize myself, and that freedom was the most valuable gift I had ever given myself. As I walked through my favorite park that evening, the cool breeze on my face and the golden sunset stretching across the sky, I smiled. I was finally living a life that felt like my own. No more manipulation, no more guilt, no obligations that weren't mine. Just me, my peace, and my strength. It was then I understood the truth. Leaving a toxic situation is only the beginning. True freedom comes when you reclaim your power, honor your boundaries, and embrace the life you deserve, without apology. It had been months since the hospital incident, months since I had confronted them and set my boundaries. Life had changed in ways I hadn't imagined. I was calmer, stronger, and more confident than I had ever been. I had learned that freedom wasn't just walking away from a toxic relationship, it was protecting my peace, refusing to be manipulated, and reclaiming my life entirely. One afternoon, my phone rang. It was my ex-mother-in-law. For a moment, I hesitated, but then I smiled. I didn't pick up. I knew what she wanted. Another frantic call, another demand, another attempt to make me feel guilty. But I didn't respond. I didn't need to. I had built a life that didn't revolve around their whims, a life where my happiness and peace came first. I realized that this was the ultimate test, not their threats, their calls, or their manipulations, but my ability to remain unshaken. And I had passed. For the first time, I felt truly untouchable by their past control. In the weeks that followed, I noticed subtle changes. My ex-husband and his mother began to act with a measure of respect I hadn't seen before. They no longer assumed that I would comply automatically or be swayed by guilt. Whether they truly understood my worth or simply feared losing access to my help, it didn't matter. I had already reclaimed what was most important, my independence and self-respect. I also began focusing more on myself in ways I had never allowed before. I pursued hobbies I had abandoned, strengthened friendships that had been neglected, and invested my energy in work that brought me joy and satisfaction. I traveled, laughed, and even found moments of serenity I thought I had lost forever. The most profound change, however, was internal. I no longer felt the weight of obligation pressing down on me. I no longer questioned my decisions or doubted my boundaries. I had learned the invaluable lesson that caring for others should never come at the cost of your own peace. I could be compassionate without being controlled, generous without being manipulated, and present without being exploited. As I sat on my balcony one evening, watching the sun set in hues of gold and orange, I felt a deep sense of closure. I had survived manipulation, emotional exhaustion, and betrayal. I had faced the people who had tried to control me and emerged stronger, wiser, and freer than ever. Freedom, I realized, wasn't a destination, it was a choice, a daily, deliberate choice to honor yourself, your needs, and your boundaries, no matter what others demanded. If you've ever had to reclaim your life and stand up for yourself, like, share, and subscribe to my channel. Remember, your peace is priceless, and no one has the right to take it from you.